There are a lot of big unanswered questions about the government, our elections, COVID, the CIA. To help me go through some of these, I have Mike Benz with me again. Mike, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks, Stephen. Great to talk to you.
So our last show, man, it did really well. People really loved the deep dive that you did on how the elections work, how they were not up to snuff compared to what CISA and others were saying. So I wanted to get into a couple of things that maybe you could help me with. Since you and I last spoke, the Georgia election audit in Fulton County, Georgia, revealed 380,761 missing ballot images from election day and over 17,000 ballot images from the Recount audit. Everyone seemed baffled, but the only recommendation was maybe next time we should be more careful. What I want to know is, where are those ballots? Where are those images? Did they ever really exist? Did Biden get more ballots or more votes? Did he actually win Georgia? What are your thoughts on that big breaking story that's come out?
It's a great question. I mean, there's so much smoke, you can't help but suspect a fire there. I mean, the fact is Georgia is also the site of the biggest prosecutions against Trump world. You know, they rounded up 19 of Trump's lawyers and allies and Trump himself in this Georgia indictment. And you know that quote from Macbeth, "Me think the lady doth protest too much." There's me think the state doth prosecute too much. The fact that this is the site of their biggest prosecution and also the site of the biggest questions about the validity of the election there, I think is not an accident, which is to say that the biggest way to cover up a potential crime is to label a criminal anyone who investigates it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. The that whole case seems to be falling apart, though. That the woman that they put in charge of it seems to have more crimes and more skeletons in her closet than even Donald Trump. It doesn't look like it's even going to go to trial before the election in November, and now she's being reviewed by an ethics board. They're having a sidebar hearing on whether she's committed fraud, misappropriated funds, misused taxpayer money. I think the thing that was most shocking to me was to find out that she was having secret meetings with the J6 committee, Kamala Harris, the mayor of Atlanta, her lover or boyfriend, Nate Wade, was having secret meetings with the White House legal counsel paid for by the Georgia taxpayers. Like you say, there's so much smoke. How could there not be some kind of a fire?
Yeah, they couldn't even keep it in their pants for a political prosecution. I mean, this is, it's one of these things where, I mean, it's so par for the course. I mean, everybody who's, involved in the current tyranny of modern day America is almost a cartoon cutout of some weird combination of a South Park villain and a Bond villain. You can't really decide which whether to laugh or cry at some of these things, but the fact is as you said, you had the prosecutor there, Fannie Willis, with, basically bringing in a private prosecutor that she was sleeping with. You have all these people funded by George Soros, the prosecutors. I mean, these are basically bought and paid for prosecutors. And meanwhile, George Soros is, his whole financial empire is threatened by Trump's foreign policy. Trump's foreign policy on Ukraine threatens the massive Soros investments in Ukraine and in Naftogaz. And I mean, all across the world with our foreign interventionism, which is the interventionism, which is kind of the motor engine of Soros Inc., which is drafting off of the activities of the CIA and the Pentagon and the State Department, and then investing in what the industries are going to start to pop with the new regime in charge, or shorting foreign currencies when that the CIA is about to destabilize it. Well, you had Trump be the first president in 40 years who didn't declare a new war, who got us out of the war in Syria, who basically backtracked on almost 100 years of duplicitous diplomacy under the Wilson doctrine, that we can just go into any country under the sun and say we're going to plant a flag and say, well, we can overthrow your government, but it's for democracy. It's for a good reason, like James Woolsey, the CIA chief, said. And so, that ends the business model of Soros Inc. And lo and behold, all four of the prosecutions against Trump the largest campaign contributor is George Soros. I mean, think about that. The ROI on the investment. How much could Soros Inc. buy by purchasing at op-eds in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal? How much could they buy versus with an ad spend on CNN or something like that versus how much they can buy by simply buying up the prosecutor to prosecute the guy who's implementing the foreign policy that targets your business. I mean, it's completely sick, but we've seen them do this so many times before. This was the strategy in Ukraine, if you remember, where Joe Biden even personally bragged to the Council on Foreign Relations that he went over there and bribed them that if they wanted their $1 billion, then they'd better sack the prosecutor and put in a State Department vassal prosecutor within 48 hours if they want an economic lifeline from their IMF debt. They did the same thing in Georgia. They did the same thing in Kyrgyzstan. They do this all over. This is the sort of State Department CIA George Soros playbook. You buy up the prosecutors, and then you don't even need to assassinate them. You don't even need to go back into the old playbook from 50, 100 years ago. You want a problem to disappear, you buy a prosecutor, and they'll bury it for you.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned this year is the Soros Foundation. They used to put tens of millions of dollars into trying to put their thumb on the scale of the presidential election. Then they realized, wait a minute, why are we spending $100 million when we could spend $1 million on 100 local elections? And so these city council elections where maybe people spent $10,000, now they dump $100,000. They've got 10x on top of that. Or a district attorney that may have cost $100,000 to $150,000. Now they dump $1 million, $1.5 million. Again, they 10x it, and the person who doesn't have George Soros in their corner literally gets outspent and beaten, not because their policies are better, but because they have more money backing them. That was something that I learned this year. But you're right. It's completely just buying the outcome that you want. But look at the outcome. The American people are now seeing, wait a minute, look at these cities where they have changed, no cash bail. These crimes don't matter. I read just this morning, I think it's the mayor of Boston. Yeah. She wants to get rid of carjacking, stealing, larceny, theft. Like all of these are just petty crimes, and people should be back on the street before they miss supper. Like, what is going on with our country?
Yeah, I mean, you can go all the way back to the Bible. They're basically scratching out "Thou shalt not steal." Okay, well that one's on the table now. I mean, we saw what this did to the state of California. There's basically no retail businesses left in the city of San Francisco. If you want to buy a toothbrush at a Walgreens, you need to wait 15 minutes for a cashier to open up bulletproof glass for you. It's most of the major retailers have fled outside of a tiny little protected District 1 zone where the elites stay. And, the whole rest of the 2/3 of the downtown is some sort of apocalyptic walking zombie fentanyl zone. I went for a run there when I was there for a meeting a couple months ago. I only made it about 15 blocks before I had to stop into buildings to catch my breath because the stench of the poop was so bad. But then lo and behold, what happens to these cities when a Chinese dignitary comes to visit, when they want to impress China to continue their foreign investment to keep the local economy afloat? Well, suddenly all the drugs go away, all the crime is cleaned up, all the homeless people are scooped under a bridge, and they put on their pretty dress for about 15 seconds so that they can secure their billions in basically in direct investments from our number one peer competitor. And then as soon as they're gone and it's back to the citizens living there, okay, we're back to no rule of law, total law of the jungle anarchy zone. But look, if you wanted to destroy a country, this is what you do. It's almost like but this sort of gets back to this issue where the overclass in this country doesn't really live here. They're global citizens. George Soros, the largest, and it's easy to sort of fall into like the George Soros boogeyman thing. But the fact is there's no one even close. If you look at the investments into the DNC last election cycle, as you mentioned, George Soros gave $100 million. The second largest donor was only $40 million. So Soros Inc. itself is 2.5 times larger than anyone else, in the picture there. And he just gave another $18 billion to his foundation, which is now being inherited by his son. But Soros is also doing the same thing, as you mentioned, for city councils and prosecutors for the state secretaries of state, which is the actual technical administration of the state at the state level. So Soros has something called the State Secretary of State Project, which is buying up all the state secretaries of state, even in the Republican places, because there's this big overlap between the Republican Chamber of Commerce, which is global multinational corporations, which share a similar foreign policy interest as Soros Inc. This is why Soros was so tight with John McCain and that whole flock. But they have a mutual enemy in anyone who wants to put domestic priorities over foreign policy.
Yeah. Let's see. So it was George Soros last cycle, and then I believe Sam Bankman-Fried, the head of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in the world, with FTX. And then I like how the politicians were all like, well, we can't give that money back. Biden took $10 million. He can't give that money back. So the shareholders are just screwed. They lose their money, but the Democrats get to stay in power, and everybody turns a blind eye to it, including the mainstream media. I wanted to get your take, Mike, on what's going on in New York with these Donald Trump trials. The verdict could come out at any time. Like, it could be coming out right now as we interview, but I saw that the judge gave 50 pages of jury instructions and then didn't give them a copy, like expected that, average citizens and a couple of attorneys were going to remember 50 pages worth of information. Then the judge tells them, you don't need to unanimously convict on the same crime. Like, just pick a crime out of a hat. If it gets a vote, we'll put him in jail for that. This entire trial has gone on without knowing what the crime even is. They're just like throwing darts at the wall, hoping that these 12 men and women will convict on something. What are your thoughts on the Trump situation?
Well, my thoughts are the Babylon Bee is probably the hardest hitting news organization in the country right now. They made, they put up a tweet and an article saying, judge instructs jury that they don't need to find Trump guilty to convict him. And I think that basically summarizes the entire jury instructions. The fact is, as this has been noted, 4 of them could say he's innocent of everything except a tax charge. 4 of them could say he's innocent of everything except an FEC issue. And 4 of them could say he's innocent of everything except a random unspecified crime. And that results not in, basically him getting off because only 4 people could agree on a crime, but suddenly that becomes a unanimous conviction verdict. At the same time, I see them basically trying to taint the jury pool. I don't know if you noticed this morning, but they seem to be in a bit of a panic at potential holdout jurors, a kind of 12 Angry Men type situation. And Norm Eisen, the legal hatchet man behind all of this, a guy who runs through Soros world and runs through the NATO intelligence world in 12 crazy ways from Sunday. Norm Eisen just put out a tweet this morning saying that, hey, there might be a second Trump P-tape, but this one on racial grounds. In 2004, someone just came forward and said in 2004 on The Celebrity Apprentice, Trump used the N-word when describing like Omarosa or something. And there's no tape for this. If there is, it's probably some AI generated thing that they're using with these new tools from Udio and all these 11 Labs and all these guys. This is something that Trump has been president before. We've been through this is now our 3rd election cycle, and suddenly 20 years ago, someone comes forward and says, "Hey, I heard him say the N." But this is happening in the middle of jury deliberations, a totally unsubstantiated news cycle that is almost surely designed solely to get a couple people on the jury who might be holdouts to say, well, he might not have committed a crime, but he's a real son of a gun. This is a red line for me. I've got too much, pride to allow something like that. He should go down for something. And because they don't even need to agree on what that thing is, now you've got a guilty verdict. I mean, this is the kind of, frankly, like CIA rumor mongering stuff that we set up our disinformation agencies to do to rig foreign elections. You can go back and read State Department cables about CIA plans in the Guatemalan elections in 1954 to create false rumors. We do this everywhere. We have a professional fake news rumor mill. This is what, we had entire laws in this country to prevent until 2013 with Smith-Mundt, where the Smith-Mundt Act was set up at the same time our CIA was in 1947, because we knew that we had created this Wisner's Wurlitzer of fake news media to spread false and malicious rumors about foreign heads of state in order to activate the people against their own government. And the big firewall for that was the Smith-Mundt Act. And then in 2013, that gets repealed under Obama, and now we can propagandize our own people using these same soft power networks that Norm Eisen is sitting on. And Norm Eisen, lo and behold, is the guy championing this new fake N-word news cycle that, like I said, is almost entirely designed, surely, to try to taint the jury pool. So it's a sick trick, and they get away with it because they're the ones who sit on the guns of the government.
Wow. Geez, no, I did not see that. I did see that Norm Eisen already has 10 legal drafts to impeach Trump on day one if he gets back into office. These people are sick. Like, the country needs to move forward, but they don't care about that. One thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on, I had a guest mail me basically a printed version of the Hunter Biden laptop. I thumbed through this. This is absolutely disgusting. I can see why the CIA and 51 intelligence officers colluded to lie to the American public, mislead them, and install Joe Biden. If people saw what was in this, like, this is disgusting. I had to hide this from my children when it arrived in the mail. There's photos and pictures on here I've never seen, I've never imagined. Hunter Biden is like, wow, I cannot believe he does these things. I can't believe he would photograph them, video them, publish them. The stuff out here about Joe Biden is absolutely disgusting. The Biden family is absolutely disgusting. I don't know. Have you gone through the Hunter Biden laptop material? And what are your thoughts on the 51 intelligence agents that knowingly lied to the American people to install Joe Biden?
Yeah, I have. I think it's frankly a work of art. I think Garrett Ziegler, is basically an American hero for compiling that through the Marco Polo foundation that he established. This is one of these situations where, anytime there's a kind of a leak of personal information, you want to sort of defer to the person who's, because this is on the one hand, you look at it like it's private stuff. You wouldn't want this to happen to you, but this is not really actually a story about Hunter Biden, as I see it. It's a story about how the world actually works. This is a story about international statecraft. This is a story about foreign policy for personal profit, how the empire managers, the managers of the American empire, actually conduct their affairs. The fact is, it's no surprise to me that the 51 spies who lied sought to stop the dissemination of these materials and used a fake Russia predicate to do so, and that the FBI tapped all of the journalists who were initially covering it. They tapped Rudy Giuliani. They had advance notice pre-publication. The FBI did. We know that from Joe Rogan, when Mark Zuckerberg went on there, that the FBI knocked on Facebook's doors and told them not to publish an upcoming disclosure about this. We know that the Aspen Institute, which gets an inordinate amount of its funding directly from the U.S. taxpayers and is basically a CIA policy incubator and a revolving door with the CIA, the NSA, and the military, and they had an entire 3-day tabletop exercise just about a week before the story broke about how to stop the story from spreading, with amazing specificity about it relating to Hunter Biden and Burisma. Surely the FBI, which has these working groups at the Aspen Institute, leaked it to them, and they did a whole war game about how to stop the American people from knowing about the colossal scandals that the Biden family and the intelligence services were involved in. So they're covering Biden's butt and they're covering their own. And the fact is Hunter Biden was woven through this intelligence state in so many ways. It makes the mind spin. From him being on the chairman's advisory board of NDI, which is the DNC branch of the largest CIA cutout of the tens of thousands of CIA cutouts that we have all around the world. The NDI is the DNC branch of the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created by the Reagan administration in 1983 after a letter from the CIA director, Bill Colby, who was complaining that the CIA had lost its capacity to substantially fund foreign influence operations because it would be a big international scandal when CIA agents would get caught. And so he lobbied Reagan to establish a National Endowment for Democracy to send the money instead of the CIA doing it directly. I mean, this is a direct confession that this was set up by the CIA to do CIA things and make it look like it's not coming from the CIA. Lo and behold, Hunter Biden is on the chairman's advisory committee of it. And not only was Hunter a director at Burisma, but so was Cofer Black. Who was Cofer Black? He spent 30 years at the CIA, won a CIA Medal of Freedom, and he was Mitt Romney's advisor to the intelligence community. You can read Daily Beast articles on how Cofer Black was the CIA Sherpa for the 2012 Republican nominee for president, and Mitt Romney was on the board of the IRI, which is the RNC branch of the National Endowment for Democracy, the RNC branch of the CIA. And who founded the RNC branch of the CIA, the IRI that Mitt Romney was on? John McCain, the 2008 presidential candidate. So you have, and remember, George Bush W was the son of George H.W. And who was he? He was the CIA director in 1976 and the CIA liaison to the intelligence, to the oil world in the 1960s. So you have the Bushes, the McCains, and the Romneys all neck deep in the Republican foreign affairs CIA world. You have, the whole thing. We've never had a chance to pick somebody outside of this blob mafia until Trump serendipitously won an internet election in 2016 by being popular on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Reddit. And so we're living in the era of them shutting this all down, or attempting to, in order to stop us from having a choice about who to lead our country.
Yeah, it really is more and more starting to feel like the CIA versus we the people. And like every day, it seems like I uncover more and more garbage. I have great guests like you that know way more than I do. It's just like, it's so insightful, and yet it's disheartening because it's starting to feel like, wow, maybe this isn't our country. Maybe the people put forward that we think might be a good patriotic leader is actually an installed puppet. Do you think that there's any connection between the Biden family, Ukraine, and the CIA, and the reason that we're at war right now? Because I can't figure out really why we're backing Ukraine in a losing war, other than Biden is really, really interested in protecting his family legacy in Ukraine.
It's the money. Ukraine is the linchpin of the NATO strategy to seize Eurasia. Ukraine was the big buffer zone. When we won the Cold War and promised Russia that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east, and then we incrementally acquired every single country virtually in Central and Eastern Europe. The last bastion of Soviet influence over Europe was the buffer zone of Ukraine, which was split 50-50 between its sort of Western NATO half and its Eastern Russian ethnic half. And, the fact is Russia has the largest amount of natural resources in the world. actually far more than the U.S. There's $75 trillion worth of natural resources that Russia sits on. And you can just look at the Wall Street Journal for the citation that I'm referring to here. The U.S. only has 45 trillion. If you can loot Russia, you become massively rich. The fact is Russia does not have an industry or a production capability to be able to actually exploit all the resources it sits on. This is why it relies so much on partnerships with Germany to be able to be a sort of producer and have a consumer market for it. But the fact is we tried to acquire Russia territorially during the 1990s, during the Yeltsin years. If you recall, we rigged the 1996 Russian election. We sent in everything from advisors to Hollywood producers to swarm media institutions. We had a drunk puppet in the form of Boris Yeltsin basically sell out the $2 trillion of assets that the Soviet Union held collectively for its own people. Now, albeit under a communist dictatorship, if you will, but that was a publicly held trust. All those assets in industries, and we forced them through something called shock therapy to sell that all off, essentially to and I'm not even joking when I say this, but to George Soros and to Bill Browder. This is how far back this all goes. Renaissance Group and all these other investment firms that George Soros was running at the time were the vulture capitals that the U.S. State Department essentially forced Boris Yeltsin to sell off to at a fire sale price. And it ended up totally crashing the Russian economy. By 1998, the Soviet Union had lost something like, its stock market lost something like 95% of its value. This is what Jeffrey Sachs is now a whistleblower about, because he was involved in this. The Harvard endowment made out like bandits with this. We were vultures feasting on the Russian carcass. And then when Vladimir Putin got in, he reasserted Russia on the world stage using basically two tricks that they still had up their sleeve. Even though almost all of their industries had been decimated, they still had two things. They had an arms export, which is that they were still selling Russian small arms and anti-air defense systems around the world, and they had an energy industry. The fact is Russia sits on the world's second largest supply of oil and third largest supply of natural gas. And they were, at the time, 100% of all gas exports to Europe. 100% of it for natural gas came in from these Russian natural gas pipelines. They had the cheapest gas on the market, and they had the most sophisticated network architecture of gas into Europe. And so Putin started to use what was called gas diplomacy. This is how the State Department framed it, which is to bring countries back into a Russian influence orbit. He would threaten to cut off gas to Georgia, to Ukraine, to Moldova, to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the whole Central Eastern Europe portion. And so by about 2007, Russia had actually started to win back politically many of the countries that NATO was trying to finalize its, the accession into NATO and the EU. So the State Department embarked on this long program called energy diversification, where we would use energy diplomacy to coerce foreign governments in Central and Eastern Europe to buy more expensive Western gas and to diversify away from Russian gas. And this would basically decimate their economies. But in the process, it would be like a sort of leukemia treatment. It would be chemotherapy. They would scald their own economy, but in doing so, they would burn away the Russian influence from their own politics. So basically, they'd become U.S. vassal states and broke. And the problem was these countries started to revolt against these energy diplomacy programs. Germany, for example, not only had set up the Nord Stream 1, but then doubled down with Nord Stream 2. Russian influence over Ukraine started to grow. Viktor Yanukovych actually decided to go against an IMF trade deal towards NATO and for a customs deal, a trade deal with Russia. That's what set off the CIA-backed coup after the State Department funded CIA assets there to the tune of $5 billion. And Victoria Nuland bragged about this while she was giving a speech in front of a Chevron and a Shell sign. Now, both of those Western companies had invested $10 billion each in Naftogaz, the Ukraine state-owned giant, where as part of the terms of this IMF deal, Ukraine would have had to have privatized that company and sold it off to Western stakeholders, right after, they just made this giant investments. They would have made out like bandits. So part of the strategy here has been to cut Russia off of gas. This would also bankrupt them militarily. We just lost Chad to Russia. We just lost Niger to Russia. If you're following what's happening right now in Africa,
Yeah.
one
$100
by
million
one,
base in Niger.
one by one, we are, and part of this is because we're unable to achieve successful color revolutions there because Russia is militarily backstopping them through these arms sales, through its own military industrial complex, which is funded by its gas revenues. Gazprom, which was the largest company in the world in the mid-aughts, that was the Russian gas giant, which supplied 100% of Russia's natural gas. That has been the play here. And in order to cut off Gazprom from Europe, you need two things. You need a sanctions policy where the European countries agree not to buy Russian gas. But then the second thing is you need a resupply. Europe needs that gas. It has to come from somewhere. And the play has been twofold. You get these sanctions in order, which is exactly what this whole censorship cabal, this whole State Department CIA censorship cabal is just an outgrowth of the sanctions cabal. In 2014, after the CIA and the State Department overthrew, working with the Brits, overthrew the Ukrainian government, and they were not expecting the Russian backstopped counter coup and the Crimea annexation and the breakaway state of the Donbass, what they did is they did this sanctions roadshow to get every country in Europe, essentially, to try to cut off Russian gas exports as punishment for the Crimea annexation. And some of them went along willingly, some went along reluctantly, some of them went along with conditions. But the fact is this resupply has two parts to it. One is having Western LNG, liquefied natural gas. So, for example, you take it from the Permian Basin, you liquefy it, you ship it 5,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, you connect it to a port in Poland through the Baltic Strait there, which means you need Poland's government on board. You then have connecting terminals from Poland into Slovakia, which means you need Slovakia's government on board. Lo and behold, there was just a regime change in Poland, and the Slovakian prime minister just got shot and almost assassinated. And then you connect it from there into Ukraine. And so, voila, just like that, you now have a 7 times more expensive gas product that is now profiting, basically, NATO energy companies instead of the Russian Federation. But the second component of that is the fact that Ukraine actually sits on Europe's third largest reserves of shale, both in the Donbass and in the Black Sea Crimea region. There is a huge amount of untapped natural gas, which, if it can be endogenously exploited, could serve as the main resupply from Russia. And so the State Department and the CIA and the DOD, as well as their British counterparts, have been involved in this long-range plan to re-engineer the economics of the gas industry in Europe in order to swing a windfall profit to the Chamber of Commerce companies and the Council on Foreign Relations, commerce profiteers off of the fangs of the CIA. And it's done in U.S. national interest because Russia is a great power competitor and they're a military threat. And so they can get away with it to have basically a national security or a national interest predicate to profit themselves while robbing the American people of hundreds of billions of dollars.
Wow. It's interesting as how much they leverage fossil fuels to control the world, but then publicly they tell us, that they want to go green and that they want to tax us for being carbon-based life form and burning carbon. It doesn't add up, like they don't have any leverage using solar or using wind power, and yet that's what's crammed down our throat. Part of me wonders if the whole thing is just a giant psyop.
Well, don't believe the LNG export pause for a second. You may have heard this controversial action taken by the Biden administration that they would pause liquefied natural gas exports from the U.S. to around the world for about a year as they're measuring its climate impact. They are consolidating the high price of LNG. Those LNG exports are just from the U.S. onto the international market. Well, who does that actually profit? That profits foreign exporters of LNG. And lo and behold, who is the Biden family in business with? Those exact entities. It was no less than Hunter Biden himself. And we know this from that same report that you held up, that it was Hunter Biden who was working with CEFC China Energy, one of their largest LNG processors and exporters. He was personally having them as clients for his own consulting company and pitching them on deals to buy up LNG infrastructure. You have them, him in business with the spy chief of China. Well, China is now, and by the way, they're partnered with Iran as well. This was what the Iran nuclear deal was. The lead negotiator, if you recall, for the Iran deal, which Biden was a part of, his vice president. The lead negotiator for that was Bill Burns to make that happen. And who's Bill Burns now? He's the head of the CIA. And Iran just signed a $400 billion gas export deal with China. $400 billion. So the price of that gas remains high because now the U.S. is not putting extra supply on the market. And China and Iran make out like bandits with super cheap gas, totally evading, the sanctions because we can't enforce them against China. So you have a backdoor Iran deal, which becomes super profitable because now American companies are getting screwed. They can't export gas around the world. But, the two countries who have the head of the National Security Council for intelligence is, has these deep ties to Iran. You have the Hunter Biden. We know now from a text that came out 2 weeks ago that Hunter Biden said that she, that the head of the CCP in China and Joe Biden had a dinner together in 2017 that was supposed to last 2 hours, but it went 7 hours. And in Hunter's own words, they almost made out at the end. Well, hey, if I was the supreme leader of China, I would be making out with Joe Biden too. I mean, he's with this LNG export. They now get to have, like I said, I mean, they basically now get to control the world's energy supplies on this. Suddenly, climate change doesn't seem to be a big deal with respect to Iran allowing this to happen, but it's screwing us to profit. To profit foreign vultures who basically are in bed with our own political class. As I said, at the start, the importance of the Hunter Biden laptop story is not not even the salacious snorting of coke off the butt crack of hookers. It's the fact that it's foreign policy for personal profit. And until that is rectified, we're not going to have a government that serves our own people.
Yeah. Oh man. Which is exactly what we need, and hopefully that change will come. Mike, I know you've got to get on to 3 or 4 other interviews. I appreciate you coming on. This is like really, really incredible information, stuff to go continue to research. I hope you'll come back on the show. Thank you for your time and for all that you do. Where can I point people towards to follow you? Twitter or where can I point them?
Yeah, best place is on X at Mike Ben Cyber.
Okay, I will make sure to do that. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen. You too.